The shadow of the Soleimani strike. We did not do it to start a war. January 3rd, 2020. A hellfire missile fired from an American Reaper drone turns a convoy on a Baghdad road into molten metal. The target? Qasem Soleimani, the most powerful general in the Middle East. The world holds its breath. Did the 45th President of the United States just start World War III? Qasem Soleimani was not just a general, he was the shadowy architect of Iranian influence across Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. As the head of the Quds Force, the external operations arm of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, he was responsible for the deaths of over 600 American soldiers during the Iraq War through the use of sophisticated, improvised explosive devices. He was a man considered untouchable, a ghost who moved freely across battlefields, directing militias and shaping the destiny of nations. But in the weeks leading up to that strike, tensions had been building to a fever pitch. A rocket attack killed an American contractor named Nawres Hamid. In response, Iranian-backed militias laid siege to the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad, scaling the walls, setting fires, and painting graffiti that threatened revenge. The images broadcast around the world were hauntingly reminiscent of the 1979 hostage crisis. President Trump took to Twitter with a warning that sent shockwaves through Tehran. Iran will pay a very big price. This was not diplomacy, this was a promise. And then came the moment that changed everything. The strike that killed Soleimani was the most audacious assassination of a state actor since World War II. It was a targeted killing of a foreign general on the soil of a country the United States was technically allied with. But to understand why Donald Trump pulled that trigger, we have to go back to a deal Trump called the worst in history, a deal he promised to tear up. The scrapping of the JCPOA. In 2015, after years of grueling negotiations, President Barack Obama and world powers reached an agreement with Iran called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, better known as the Iran nuclear deal. Under its terms, Iran agreed to drastically limit its uranium enrichment, dismantle thousands of centrifuges, and allow unprecedented international inspections. In exchange, the United States and its allies agreed to unfreeze over $150 billion in Iranian assets and lift crippling economic sanctions. The world celebrated it as a triumph of diplomacy. But Donald Trump saw it as something else entirely. On the campaign trail in 2016, Trump made his position crystal clear. He called the deal a disaster. He argued that America got nothing in return while giving Iran access to billions of dollars that would only fuel terrorism. He pointed to the sunset clauses built into the agreement, provisions that allowed restrictions on Iran's nuclear program to expire starting in 2025. In Trump's view, the deal was not stopping Iran from building a bomb. It was simply delaying the inevitable while handing the regime a financial lifeline. On May 8, 2018, standing in the diplomatic room of the White House surrounded by charts and graphs he claimed showed Iran's cheating, Trump made the announcement. The United States was withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal. In its place, he unleashed what he called a maximum pressure campaign. The goal was economic collapse. The primary tool was oil sanctions aimed at strangling Iran's economy. Trump bet that by squeezing the regime hard enough, the Iranian people would rise up and overthrow the Ayatollahs from within. The results were swift and devastating for Iran's economy. The Iranian rial collapsed in value, losing over 80% of its purchasing power. Inflation soared past 40%. Basic goods became unaffordable for millions of Iranians. But the pressure did not topple the regime. Instead, it hardened the position of the hardliners in Tehran, and it put the United States and Iran on a collision course in the narrow waters of the Persian Gulf, where the world's oil supply flowed through a 21-mile-wide choke point called the Strait of Hormuz. The tanker wars and the downing of the drone. The summer of 2019 marked a dangerous escalation.
Iran began attacking oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz using limpet mines, small explosives attached to the hulls of ships. The footage was dramatic. The Japanese tanker Kokuka Courageous exploded in flames as the world watched. Iran's strategy was clear. They were testing Donald Trump, probing to see how much pain he was willing to inflict and whether he would respond with military force or restraint. Then came the incident that brought the two nations to the edge of war. On June 20th, 2019, Iran shot down an American Global Hawk surveillance drone, a sophisticated unmanned aircraft worth over $220 million. The drone was flying over international airspace, or so the United States claimed. Iran insisted it had violated their territorial boundaries. Regardless of the details, the act was a direct challenge to American military might. Behind closed doors, the White House mobilized for war. Fighter jets were in the air, naval ships were in position. The military was minutes from launching retaliatory airstrikes against Iranian radar and missile sites. But then, something unprecedented happened. Donald Trump called off the strikes at the last minute. When asked why, he gave an answer that revealed his unconventional approach to military conflict. He explained that he had asked a general how many people would die in the proposed strikes. The general replied that the estimated death toll was 150 Iranians. Trump responded by saying that shooting down an unmanned drone did not justify killing 150 people. It didn't seem proportionate to him. The planes were recalled. This moment defined Donald Trump's foreign policy. It was a blend of deal-making instincts and a deep aversion to traditional military quagmires. But the hawks in Washington were furious. Many believed Trump had blinked, and in Tehran, the hardliners drew a dangerous conclusion. They believed they had found a weakness in the American president. That miscalculation would cost them their most valuable asset just 6 months later. The assassination. As 2019 came to a close, the situation deteriorated further. On New Year's Eve, hundreds of pro-Iranian militiamen breached the perimeter of the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. They smashed windows, set fires in reception areas, and spray-painted messages warning of revenge. The images broadcast around the world were hauntingly reminiscent of the 1979 hostage crisis. President Trump was determined not to let that be his legacy. Intelligence reports began circulating that Qasem Soleimani was planning a series of imminent attacks against American embassies and military personnel across the region. The intelligence, according to Trump administration officials, indicated that Soleimani was moving to escalate the conflict in a way that would result in significant American casualties. The decision was made. The most dangerous man in the Middle East would be taken off the board. On January 3, 2020, Soleimani arrived at Baghdad International Airport on a flight from Damascus. He was greeted by senior Iraqi militia leaders. As he climbed into a convoy of vehicles leaving the airport, an American MQ-9 Reaper drone circling overhead fired a series of hellfire missiles. The vehicles were obliterated. Qasem Soleimani, the mastermind of Iranian power across the region, was dead. The world reacted with shock. It was the most audacious assassination of a state actor since World War II. A targeted killing of a foreign general on the soil of a country the United States was technically allied with. But to understand why Donald Trump pulled that trigger, we have to go back to a deal Trump called the worst in history, a deal he promised to tear up. The ballistic missile strike and the plane crash. In the early morning hours of January 8, 2020, the retaliation arrived. Iran launched 22 ballistic missiles at 2 American bases in Iraq. The primary target was Asad Air Base, a sprawling installation that housed hundreds of American soldiers. The missiles streaked through the night sky, and air raid sirens blared across the base. For hours, the world waited to learn the fate of the American personnel. The Pentagon braced for massive casualties. No one knew if the President of the United States was still alive. And then came the miracle. Despite the ferocity of the missile barrage, not a single American soldier was killed. How was that possible? It was later explained that Iran had deliberately targeted non-occupied areas of the bases. They had fired the missiles to demonstrate their capability and to satisfy their domestic demand for revenge. It was a signal. Iran wanted de-escalation while saving face. The next morning, Donald Trump appeared before the cameras in the grand foyer of the White House. He began his remarks with 3 words: "All is well." He announced that no Americans had been harmed and that the United States would respond not with military force, but with additional economic sanctions. The immediate crisis had passed. The 2 nations had stepped back from the brink. But the same night that Iran launched her missiles, a separate tragedy unfolded. Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 took off from Tehran's Imam Khomeini Airport bound for Kyiv. Minutes later, in a state of panic and confusion, Iran's air defense system mistook the civilian airliner for an